Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage Podcast. I'm your host, James Azar. We have an episode that is going to blow you away today. I've got my very good friend, David Maimon, director at the Georgia State University, evidence-based cybersecurity program, a revolutionary program, one of its kind in the continent world today, and actually our globe, right?
I think so.
But before we get started, since David and I know each other and we're kind of friends, like to say kind of friends, we are friends.
We are.
I'm doing a guinea pig, and for those who don't know, I enjoy espresso. Like, that's the only coffee I drink, and if I don't have an espresso, I don't function. So, like, when I stay at a Holiday Inn, I hate it because they don't have espresso machines.
Okay.
And to be in a place that has an espresso machine, you pay $400 a night. Now, I can't do that. So, in the tradition of trying to get an espresso to sponsor our show, we are going to take a shot of espresso before we start every episode going forward. And David's having the Ethiopian shot, and I'm taking a Colombian.
Is there a specific way you want me to hold a cup?
I'm gonna hold it by these like nice little handles, but you can hold it any way you want.
Yeah. So we're not doing it.
We should do it the Italian way. You know, Italians, they rub a lemon wedge on the espresso.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
They give you a lemon wedge.
Okay.
But
so we just take it all, or
I'm chugging.
Okay.
This is like a shot of tequila.
Okay.
But this will get us going.
All right, let's do
L'chaim.
it, man. L'chaim.
Oh, that was good.
Wow, it was. Ethiopian was really good.
Yeah, Ethiopian is good. Colombian is really good. So that was our shot of an espresso for today's episode. And before we get started, though, I want to talk about GetSmartEye.com and their new innovative way to protect your most private documents in the most public places. Most of us enjoy working outside the confines of a traditional office, whether it's a coffee shop, co-working space, or when we travel at airports and train stations. Some people are nosy, trying to catch a glimpse of your screen and what you're working on. With GetSmartEye, you won't have that problem anymore. With their innovative technology, GetSmartEye uses advanced facial recognition software to ensure that only you are viewing your most private documents. And should anyone try to catch a glimpse of your screen and their face enter the area around the camera of your device, the screen would automatically remove the document from your screen. So whoever's looking at it will just be staring at a blank screen. So just don't waste any more time looking for that coveted seat at the coffee shop where you're trying to get in the corner with your screen, you know, to the wall because you don't want anyone to stare. Go to getsmarteye.com/James. Again, that's getsmarteye.com/James for a free demo of the product. The official launch of GetSmartEye is next week, May 7th. It'll be launching here in Atlanta, Georgia at the Atlanta Tech Village. So if you're in the Atlanta area, you're watching this and you want to be there, you can reach out to me on Twitter, James_Azar1. We'll get you a pass to the event. Otherwise, go to getsmarteye.com/James for more information. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We have to make money.
Perfectly understand that.
But Dexter's a good guy. So thanks for being here, man. You and I have been planning this podcast for like ages.
That's right, yeah.
And you have a really interesting background because you're not really a cyber guy. You're not a traditional CISO. You weren't in CISO. You weren't a CISO. You're a college professor.
Right.
And would you mind sharing with our listeners how you ended up in cybersecurity or kind of like the program that you're running at Georgia State? Because, I mean, your story fascinated me the first time we met.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I always love hearing it, though.
So when I graduated, my PhD is actually in sociology, man. And when I graduated from Ohio State,
Ohio State.
The Ohio State.
Helen watches this podcast.
That's right.
And if you say Ohio State, she will hate mail me later.
Right. So the Ohio State University, and you know, I'm actually trying to be very particular about that myself as well. So when I graduated, my area of research was focused on neighborhood effects, meaning, you know, back then I was trying to understand how the neighborhood within which you live in really influence your deviant behaviors, juvenile deviant behaviors, you know, health-related issues. And so during my first position in Miami, that's what I was doing. But then the University of Maryland hired me. We moved to Baltimore. And, you know, the University of Maryland, their Department of Criminology is top-notch. And, you know, when I got there, I was really sort of worried about getting tenure there. And I met with my department chair at the time, and she told me that in order for us to get tenure in the department, we need to come up with a meaningful contribution. So, here I am, this really, newbie, right, in academia, trying to figure out how I'm getting tenure. And one of my colleagues told me that he needed someone to write a paper around cyber terrorism. So I started working on that area because, again, the people there in Maryland were very high ranked and, very known. So I was trying to get their attention and realized that there's really no literature in our field in criminology about cybercrime. So, putting one and one together, right, the fact that I need to come up with a meaningful contribution on the one hand and then wanting to please, in a way, my colleagues, I started working in this area of cybercrime, and here I am, 8 years after.
It's funny you bring that up because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who works for the FBI. We were literally having that conversation yesterday, here. And it wasn't recorded for the podcast. It was off the record. And
who was your friend?
I can't tell you.
Okay.
I'd have to kill you. Or he would kill me, and then you would find me buried in the back, in the creek in the back of my house. And, that would be a shame.
Right.
I like living. But he was talking about how difficult it is to really prosecute cyber criminals. One, because there's no clear law or legislation in place in the U.S. that talks about cybercrime.
Right.
And when you notice when they prosecute hackers, they're typically prosecuting them on wire fraud or tax evasion, money laundering, blackmail, but there's no statute anywhere. So they investigate based on U.S. Statute 1030, but they never really prosecute on 1030 because it's very hard to prove 1030 in court.
Yeah. There is, Computer Misuse and Abuse Act. This is very important act that the FBI is using or tried to use more and more to indict people. But yeah, right. At the end of the day, it's very difficult.
There's a challenge with that because there's intent, and how can you prove intent?
And that is very true. It's problematic to prove intent in cyberspace. These are some of the things that we're trying to figure out. We know that in a way, you can nudge people to behave in a specific way, right? If we can nudge people to behave in a specific way that we'll be able to use to infer intent, that'll be huge as well. So we're not there yet.
You'd have advocates that would claim entrapment, right? Because if you're telling someone, oh, you should totally do this,
right,
then that would almost look like entrapment. The FBI does this in, a case we're not hearing a lot about, and I don't know why, but the day after the synagogue shooting in San Diego on Saturday, the FBI foiled a plot and arrested a former U.S. serviceman who served in Afghanistan, who converted to Islam, who went to a white nationalist rally, and with the intent of killing 50 people in retaliation for the New Zealand attacks. Now, this is a U.S. serviceman, and he was essentially operated by an undercover FBI agent. So the bomb that he took with him to the event wasn't ever going to go off.
Right.
But he was a U.S. serviceman, and they wanted to see would he really go there and blow himself up, because that's the ultimate intent.
Right.
If you go there and you lay the bomb down and you walk away and you dial a phone to do that, that's the ultimate intent. And in cyber terrorism, in terrorism period, you can prove that intent. If someone walked somewhere and left a backpack, you'd see it.
Right.
But how do you do that in cyber?
So in general, I think the concept of intent is very difficult.
Right.
Because as a prosecutor, you will have to prove that I had the intent. But if I say that I did not have the intent, how do you contradict me? You're going to have to sort of look at my acts and sort of infer. So it's not a very scientific way, right, to determine whether someone had the intent to come up with a specific act. So I'll give you an example. So you have hackers, right, hacking to our system. You're trying to understand why are they doing it, their intent. Are they trying to, just mess around with your system? Are they trying to steal stuff from you? Are they trying to spy on you? It's very difficult to infer their intent simply by looking at their acts, because it could be that, when they first started that sort of the hack, and they launched the Cyberkill chain activities that they need to engage in, they had one thing in mind, right? They wanted to sort of mess around and see what you have on your computer. But then they found something really interesting, and they started exploring with it. And then, they say, the hell with it. I'm going to take it and sell it on the darknet, right? So it's very difficult to sort of, in my opinion, in my view, to prove intent unless you talk to people, unless you talk to the hacker, really ask him, and he could be lying as well. We're trying to do our best in the criminal law sort of discipline to sort of come up with a way to infer intent and prove intent. But it's not an exact science. It's very difficult to do that.
So what is evidence-based cybersecurity? What is this program that you're kind of doing at Georgia State?
So when we started this program, essentially we brought the approach that I started developing in Maryland when I was a professor there. The whole concept of the approach suggests that in order for us to make decisions, security-related decisions, we need to have evidence. We need to make sure that we base those decisions on scientific evidence that really tells us what works and what doesn't in the context of cybersecurity. So, you have all those companies selling products. You have all those policies that our CISO enforce and deploy in the context of our organizations. But the question is, how effective those tools are really in achieving those the goals that we have for them, and how effective those policies are in achieving those goals. That's what essentially we're trying to do. I mean, you're spending a lot of money on IDSs and IPSs and antiviruses and all those really cool tools and technology that we have. At the end of the day, what are you getting, right, for this $100,000? You just sort of...
Where's the bang for your buck?
Exactly. That is what's missing in our field. And that's what evidence-based cybersecurity, that's sort of the gap that evidence-based cybersecurity is trying to fill. We do that in the context of understanding the effectiveness of tools and policies. We also try to do that in the context of building new and designing new computing environments and policies. CISOs and technology experts, when they design a security environment, they try to protect our cyberspace. They have sort of common notions with respect to the way they should deploy tools, right, and the way they should sort of try and identify hackers on the system. But there's really no research that tells you that this is what you should look for, right, and this is how you should sort of find a hacker on the system. Folks, CISOs, security experts, they base that on their personal experiences, their background. What we try to do with the approach that we bring is really try to figure out how the computing environment push the bad guys, push the good guys to behave, and based on that, guide decision that will alert the CISO's attention for the presence of illegitimate actors on the system, as well as way to nudge the good guys to behave and comply with the security procedure that the CISO sort of have for the organization. That is what evidence-based cybersecurity is essentially all about.
So it's funny because you're part of the criminal justice school at Georgia State. You're not really part of the computer science or information security. You're kind of all on your own. You're in criminal justice, which is, I saw Professor J.P. Shim last week. We were at a conference in Atlanta, and we were talking, and he's obviously in information security, and and I was asking him, I go, how'd you guys end up with a cyber program in criminal justice? I mean, because when you say that to an average CISO or anyone, they go, I mean, FBI people would understand it. They go, we need this.
Right.
Secret Service folks would say the same. DOJ would say the exact same thing. But why did Georgia State go down this specific path?
So first of all, let me just say that I do have an appointment with the computer science department as well. So I have a joint appointment with them. And the center is very interdisciplinary. So we have the criminologists, we have the computer scientists, and we have the computer information system folks working with us as well. I have an appointment with the business school as well. Because we believe, and because Georgia State believed, that cybersecurity is an interdisciplinary area of research.
Right.
Why criminology? It's a great question. I think that what's missing right now is the focus on the human behavior, the human element in cyberspace. Most of the tools, as we just mentioned, most of the tools that are available out there for us to deploy in the context of our organization are technical tools. The companies that build those tools focus on the technical side of things, of cyberspace and cybersecurity. Not too many people take into consideration the human. But the human is a very important part of the equation.
Right.
Once you fail to give the human attention, you only answer half of the question. And so what we're doing is, we're trying to marry both the human and the technology. And the cool thing about what we do and the criminology department and how we do things in the criminological discipline in general is that we focus on the human. We have our own research methods that allow us to understand the human. And by driving the car, so to speak, in the context of cybersecurity, we no longer join sort of existing teams of technicians who try to develop a tool. In a way, what we're doing is we have a vision with respect to how the tool should look like, with respect to how should we do better cybersecurity. We bring in the computer scientist and we do it we try to sort of do things in a different way. The research methods that we have in the social sciences are very different than the computer science, very different than, they're similar to the computer information system, but very much different than the computer science. And so, by taking a more social science approach to cybersecurity, I think that you can answer more, of the questions that you're trying to resolve. So,
do you feel like students are starting to get the idea of, when people think of a cybersecurity career? I was having a conversation yesterday with a CISO, and we were talking about the different hats you have to wear in cyber. Mm-hmm. And with the workforce today, with so much automation coming into play in cyber, if you just specialize in one thing, you may find yourself out of a job and unable to get another one because you're so focused on just this one area, you got to wear multiple hats. Right. And you hear a lot of students when they come up to CISOs or even myself, they go, I want to get into cyber. Right. And you say, what part? And they don't really know. Is criminal justice another part of cyber? Do you feel like is it a similar path? Do you need technical experience, meaning?
I don't think you need technical experience, especially not in the context of what we do. I think that the criminal justice or the criminologists, they bring their background in criminology, sort of understanding, human behavior, the research methods, how to understand the progression of a criminal event. That's what we bring, and then we sort of try to think about or understand all of those concepts, all those criminological constructs and concepts in the context of cybersecurity and cyberspace. The computer scientists should bring the technical background, the criminologists bring the social science background, the understanding of human behavior, the research methods, and together, I think it makes sense, that to sort of push the envelope in that context. So, to tell you that I believe that students should have some background in criminal justice, I would say that, in my opinion, the students should have experience collecting data, understanding how humans think, understanding how criminals behave in offline and online environment. But that should be in addition to the technical skills that we try to teach them in the more technical department, like the computer science department and engineering schools.
It's very interesting because you brought up something of how do criminals behave in an offline and online way. Yeah. And it feels like when you view an average person's behavior online, and and you go through Twitter or Facebook or let's leave LinkedIn aside, but if you go through Twitter and Facebook, people tend to hide behind a virtual identity that's completely different from what they really are. What they are online is very different from what they are offline. Offline, they can look very normal. I mean, the synagogue shooter offline to everyone around him looked like a normal 19-year-old kid. But online, he was a hate-filled, just felt marginalized, very propaganda, very propaganda. Do you feel like that behavior is becoming easier to identify, or do you feel like that behavior is still very difficult to quantify?
So what do you mean behavior? What, so you mean criminal behavior?
I mean,
and based on signs you observe in the offline and online environment?
Right, because offline, this kid looked completely normal.
Right.
There's no way in the world anyone would thought this 19-year-old kid, and I won't say names of people who do mass shootings. I don't give them free press, but this kid walked into, and we call him a kid, he's an adult. So this 19-year-old man, walked into a place of worship and shot people up. But in normal life, every single day, this man was walking around, seemed normal, did all things normal people do.
Right.
But online, he had a completely different identity. Do you feel like in programs like yours, when you talk about evidence-based cybersecurity and kind of understanding the criminal, because I think that's what a lot of people today don't quite piece this stuff together, and maybe I'm way ahead of myself here, or maybe I'm just talking nonsense, and you can clarify that.
Listen, it makes perfect sense, and we know there's a lot of psychological research that essentially indicates that we have those offline and online personas, right? And to really understand
split personality.
It's it's not really split. It's the same personality. It's just a different manifestation of the personality in offline and online environment, right?
Okay.
So in order for you to really understand a person, you need to take into consideration, both the online and offline manifestation of his or her behavior. Now, to your question and whether it's easier to detect and identify those behaviors because of the online manifestations, to tell you the truth, I don't think so. Because most of the individuals that want to behave in a rude or a criminal way, they don't do that online under their true identity.
Right, they
hide. It's very difficult. Exactly, they hide. So it's very difficult to sort of put one and one together before an event happens, right? And predict that this guy or that guy will engage in either offline or online crimes. I think that after the case, it's really interesting to sort of try and generate this complete picture of the individual personality and see, try to think how that sort of pushed the individual to engage in a specific behavior or not. But it's very difficult to predict the event right before it happens based on what we have online.
Well, it's always easier to judge something after it happened. You see that in mainstream, right? They bring these panels of experts and they go, was there a way to recognize?
Right.
And, and you have all these different opinions, and I feel like, that's just garbage. It's just pure, airtime of just wasting time watching something. Really, people have a different manifestation, and I feel like research that what you guys are doing and based on our conversations has a really interesting point of view, because you can really build a case with research that can be presented to a judge to get a warrant to be able to tap someone's phone or be able to go through an encryption that he's using for messages to really kind of be like, he's normal, he's going to the supermarket, he's going to work, he's getting in his car, he's going to church, he's doing all these different things. But really, in the hearts of hearts, during lunchtime, he's not really eating his cheese sandwich.
Right.
He's, scoping out a place. He's,
But this is essentially what the forensic guys will do. So, we are researchers, right? I mean, so we're less interested in cases like the one you just mentioned.
Right. No,
but the forensics guys, right? I mean, after they capture someone who were engaged in a specific behavior, in order for them to really understand the individual, in fair intent, as we discussed earlier, you need to create a picture, right? A complete picture of the individual and the personality. And so that's why, you're going to talk to witnesses that will talk about how the individual behave, right? I mean, whether he's a good person or not, but at the end of the day, you will also go to his the smartphone, computer, and try to get us some evidence for the online manifestation of this personality. So it's really interesting. This is after the fact,
right?
But it's not really research, right? I mean, this evidence is essentially used for
prosecution.
For prosecution, exactly. The evidence that we produce is evidence that is supposed to be used by CISOs, is supposed to be used by policymakers in their decision with respect to which tool to implement, which policies to implement when we're trying to protect our infrastructure.
Our infrastructure. So going to that, you guys recently discovered something that is really fascinating: the TLS black market, the encryption, decryption key black market. And for some of the people who may not understand what that means, would you care just kind of explaining how you guys kind of found that bombshell of what's supposed to make me and you and everyone else feel really safe online? Your website's encrypted, your information's encrypted, and really there's a black market, with the decryption keys out there that people can buy and really just decrypt data in a heartbeat minute.
Right.
I mean,
so essentially what we found was that there are people out there in the darknet, on underground markets that sell certificates, EV, DV, OV certificates. The certificates, the whole point of the certificates is to really allow traffic to be encrypted between the server and the computer that talks to it. And there are different level of certifications. They have the DV, the OV, and the EV. The EV is the highest level of certification. It essentially suggests that the certifying authorities really check, who you are before they grant you that certificate. So, if you're saying that you're Facebook and you want to encrypt the traffic that comes in and out from your server to your client, you're going to talk to those EV certificates. You will purchase the certificate. Essentially what will happen is that the authorities will verify that the server is yours, that you are who you say you are, that the company is real, and so on and so forth. What we found is that there are people out there that are willing to sell EV certificates without really verifying that you are who you say you are. And that is what is so earth-shaking in our opinion. Those TLS certificates are supposed to make sure that you're talking to a website. When you're a client, you're talking to a website that you can trust. It should increase your level of trust in the vendor that you're going to his website. And we found that the bad guys found a way to mess around with that. That is essentially what the finding is all about. And unfortunately, I can't talk a whole lot about some of the ways that the vendors and the people that we sort of talk to online actually do that. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that, in August after we, launch our second report.
Right.
But to us, what was really interesting was the existence of this market. The fact that people are interested in those certificates. We know from talking to the vendors that they made thousands of sales. So there's interest in those certificates for different purposes. And we can talk about it later if you want. I mean,
here's where I see the purpose for this, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, when some of our listeners may not be, they're just starting their career in cyber, they don't understand it. But if you're spoofing a website and you're able to buy one of these certificates to give you the complete illusion that you are really on this website, I mean, that's the danger of this, right? I mean, that's the practical, everyday danger to every person is you can land on a website that looks like your bank, feels like your bank, looks a domain very, very similar to your bank. But really, it's a spoofed website by a hacker who's now getting all your information and could be draining your bank account and you wouldn't even know it.
So
in theory.
In theory, right now, we have to make sure that we understand that it's very difficult to get, the a spoofed website for Bank of America, because the certifying authorities and the individuals that will essentially grant you the TLS certificates, they are aware of those, potential scams. And if you contact the vendors and ask them to provide an EV certificate or even, the green bar to your spoofed Bank of America website, it'll be very difficult to do that.
But if you're able to buy that EV certificate through the dark web,
but even through the darknet, and again, hopefully in the second report we will explain how these guys are doing this, and that'll make more sense. Even through the darknet, it's very, very difficult to get the EV certificate for a spoofed Bank of America website. But what's easy to do, and that's what we showed, what's easy to do is to put together your own bank website or your own,
social
network, your own website that allows you to transfer money from, one person to another, your own casino, right? And get those EV certificates. That is what is so interesting. The certifying authorities essentially will not want to support these kind of operations, and we found that the vendors on the darknet, they are able to do that, and so that's why I think the research is so interesting.
Do you feel like this whole marketplace is just the kind of you're at the bottom of the Himalayas, and as you continue to climb, you're going to discover more and more and more and more things about, the encryption and how, maybe, I'm a big fan of encryption, but, one of the things you and I were talking about recently when we met was how quantum computing is probably going to change the way you encrypt data, because if you've got a super quantum computing power, you can unencrypt the best encryption in 4 hours.
Right.
I mean, do you feel like as you keep climbing that mountain, it's going to end up getting worse and worse?
I think that there's still a lot of time till we actually have quantum computing. I actually participated in an event a year and a half ago when we debated about that and try to figure out when we're going to see quantum computing. And as far as I understand, this is still a theoretical issue.
But supercomputers are very real.
Supercomputers are very real, right? To try and answer your question again. So quantum computing, I'm not really sure. I mean, once I see those computers, up and running, then it'll make sense for me to comment on that. What I can comment about is the computers that we currently have, and the fact that I completely agree with you. The more we drill, the more we sort of dive into, the darknet, the more the more sort of commodities we find that essentially disclose the presence of holes, right, and the presence of 0 days and vulnerabilities that the bad guys are using, and that essentially ends up, in our computers.
Crazy. We're going to keep going about that in just a second, but before we continue, I want to extend an invitation to our listeners to join the premier cybersecurity conference in the U.S. CyberHub Summit is hosting its annual summit in Atlanta, Georgia on September 11th, 2019. CyberHub Summit is the go-to cybersecurity conference for executives and those passionate about security. This conference isn't just another conference with panels and speakers, but rather CyberHub Summit focuses on helping attendees experience cyber different. This year, CyberHub Summit has an amazing agenda of how we can all work together to address the various cybersecurity challenges on topics like homeland security, fintech, and industrial control systems, all three of which are critical to our national infrastructure. Together this year, we will address the various ways of how we can plan ahead and be prepared to address these attacks. Make sure to go to cyberhubsummit.com/James. Again, that's cyberhubsummit.com/James to pre-register for this year's summit, as it is sure to sell out early. Tickets go on sale May 15th, so make sure you pre-register now so that you're able to get your tickets before it sells out. So again, go to cyberhubsummit.com/James. So here's the thing, David. Hackers are developing much faster than we're developing in the world of defending against their attacks. We're often very much reactive rather than proactive. Do you think organizations have a chance of catching up to that pace of how hackers are developing kind of new tools and using those in attack vectors?
So I guess you need to define catching up. So we know that preventing the bad guys from generating attacks, this is not going to happen. I mean, it's very difficult to prevent cybercrime and system trespassing and hacking from happening. We are exploring ways to do that. We develop amazing tools, right, in order for us to do that. But at the end of the day, I don't think that we're in a better place than we were 20 years ago in terms of people, infiltrating to our systems. I think that the question should be different, and the question should be more focused on mitigation. The question is, what can you do, right, in order to detect the presence of these guys on your system faster, and then being able to respond to this in a more, effective and efficient way. My premise as a scholar and as a cybersecurity personnel is that, someone will find a way to your system. The question is, in my opinion, how fast are you going to detect the presence of that individual, and how are you going to respond in such a way that will mitigate the consequence of the event? And so, to answer that, you need the approach that we bring, right? Which is essentially focused on the progression of the criminal event, what the bad guys are doing once they're infiltrating into your system.
Right.
What's the first thing that they're doing? What's the second thing that they do? Whether there's a path, like a generalized path that they sort of follow, and based on that, nudge them to expose their presence on the system. Once you do that, you can mitigate the consequence of the event, right? That's one thing that you can do. You can constrain the effect to specific areas that are still important, but not as important as the holy grail you're trying to protect. And in a way, generate a more effective and secure environment.
So you started off.
So I don't think, so just to make sure that we're on the same page, I think that's the only way, right, we can be ahead of these guys, right, when they are attacking us. In terms of preventing, it will be very difficult for us to prevent the attack from happening, because they will come up with new tools, new technologies. They will find new holes, right, in our system on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, right? But when they're on your system, essentially they will behave very similarly, no matter what, right? So as long as you understand the patterns of behavior, as long as you use this understanding to nudge them, to push them to behave in a predictable way, once they're on the system, then you'll be able to respond to the event in a more effective way.
So, you started talking about detection, and I think for most people who don't understand security, don't understand also how difficult detection really is, because hackers they're in business to get information from your business.
Right.
And they're very good at it. And, the thing that we say is, the company has to be on point every time. They've got to be perfect 100% of the time. A hacker only has to be lucky once to get in.
Right.
And all it takes is what you were saying earlier, that human error, right? That one guy to click a link, that one person to, take a thumb drive that he finds in the parking lot and plug it into his device, or connecting to a Wi-Fi around the office, around a lunch area of an office that's a free Wi-Fi, thinking, okay, I can, watch YouTube videos while I eat my lunch on Wi-Fi, and really that Wi-Fi being a malicious way to infect them. So once the device gets on the network, this is where I feel like, how can we address that kind of behavior? Because those are the way these guys get in. Hackers don't break through the window. They look for that human impact, and that's part of your research. You really kind of talked about that human aspect of it in criminology. Yeah. Where's the balance? What can organizations do? I
think that, again, you're touching on a really important issue, and that is the asymmetry of cybersecurity. As you mentioned, the bad guys just need to find one hole in order to get in. But we as security experts, we need to make sure that all those holes, are patched and no one can get in, right? And so because of that asymmetry, hackers are always, a step ahead of us. I think that once they're in our system, the first time they're on our system, we are a step ahead of them, because we know our system better than they do.
They're exploring our system.
They need to explore, They need to find, what's going on in our system, And so this is the only, if you think about the Cyberkill chain, and we can talk about the Cyberkill chain if you want later, but if you think about that's the only place on the Cyberkill chain where, we are ahead of the curve than the hacker. And so we need to take advantage of that advantage we have, and push the bad guys to explore, push the bad guys to make those mistakes in order to detect their presence on the system. That is, to me, I wouldn't say that this is the perfect solution.
Right, but that's more like honeypots, isn't it?
Well, you begin with this as a honeypot, right? I mean, the honeypot is a good tool that allows you to focus on the first steps a hacker make on the system. Then you can take the finding you have from the honeypot and try to look for those specific signs on real computers, right? That's the approach that we take, right? And we want to see what the bad guys are doing on the honeypot, right? They don't know, at least the first few steps, right? The first time they're on the system, they don't know it's a honeypot, right? They need to figure it out. And so they need to explore, they need to figure out what's going on in the system, they need to figure out whether it's a honeypot or not. And after they discover it's a honeypot or not, then they make a decision to whether stay, destroy the honeypot or whatever. But the initial steps, right? I mean, we are ahead of them, right? Because we know it's a honeypot, we know what's in there, and we need to take advantage of this, and we need to do that by pushing the bad guys to behave in a way that will expose their presence on the system. The honeypots are a very good tool for us to detect their initial behaviors, and then we take those patterns we observe of the honeypot and deliver them to the real systems that the bad guys are trying to attack. That is how we're trying to come up with a list of red flags, a technology configuration that will put us a step ahead of the guys, a step ahead of the bad guys in this game.
So when we talk about, when you were talking about the Cyberkill chain, very old, I think, what is it, 15 years old now, the Cyberkill chain, maybe a little bit younger. I forgot, we'll have to Google that later. But how does the Cyberkill chain play in the future of AI and cyber?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. I mean, again, Cyberkill chain, I mean, we all understand what it is, right? I mean, it's essentially the stages of an attack, right?
Right.
The question is, what do you do with the Cyberkill chain? If you, again, the way I understand AI and the way we sort of work and envision AI is by essentially teaching the machine, right, to respond and to behave based on some kind of knowledge,
right,
that we feed into it, right? That's what essentially machine learning and AI is all about, right?
Right.
The major question and the major debate and the major thing that we need to give attention to is what do we teach the machine, right? And how do we teach the machine? With respect to what do we teach the machine, that is, I think, very much relevant to the Cyberkill chain and the question you just asked, right? Because at the end of the day, we have the Cyberkill chain, but it's a very broad concept. I mean, you can.
People use the kill chain in different ways, right?
Yeah, weaponizing, right? I mean, so what does it mean? I mean, so we have definition of what does it mean, but there are so many things, right, that fall under this concept.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, and the way we sort of treat the development of security tools and the involvement and the relevance of AI to it is you need to generate some research in the context of weaponizing, in the context of installation, in the context of exploitation, understand how the bad guys are behaving, understand what are some of the patterns, behavioral patterns that they engage in, and then build machines, right? Based on what we know about the behavioral patterns, that will respond.
Sounds like a sci-fi movie.
but this is how it should be. I mean, so to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a set of parameters with respect to how people behave and how things should be like, and then design a tool that will use AI to respond to it. I think that what needs to be happening is that you need to have evidence from the world, from the online environment, and based on that you need to develop those tools and have the AI algorithm and the machine learning sort of processes to respond to build those tools, right, and to respond to those events.
Could AI really?
So hopefully that answered the question.
It did. My follow-up to that would be: do you think AI can manipulate research in cybersecurity? Meaning, if someone knows, organization X, and there's a lot of organizations out there and cybersecurity vendors that do a lot of research. If I'm a hacker and I want to kind of throw them off my trail, could AI essentially be a way for me to get people to invest millions of dollars in research on something that isn't relevant to anything so that I can weaponize something else? Do you feel like that's a real threat to the future of how we look at cybersecurity threats?
So in a way, what you're talking about are two bots, right, talking to each other, right?
Well, I'm talking about there's a bot out there, and someone finds this bot, it's AI, right? And they're going, oh, this AI is a hacker's AI bot that's out there trying to weaponize and go through the kill chain and identify different vulnerabilities, and I'm gonna start researching it.
Right.
But really, this is the hacker's honeypot to researchers.
Right.
To get you to focus on doing something completely different from what they're really planning, right? You see that in terrorism. And you started your research on cyber terrorism, which is why I kind of refer to this, is because when you think of actual terrorists, a lot of times what they try to do is make you think like, hey, we're going to go after this target.
Right.
You're investing all your resources here. Meanwhile, they're planning something much bigger, much more devastating somewhere else.
Right.
And they're really distracting you and your resources from really understanding the real objective.
Right.
As we get better in defense, and like as you said, we start identifying things better, our research gets better, our tools, we're able to identify better tools, we're able to identify patterns better, and we're going to get better, right?
Hopefully, yeah.
I want to say hopefully as well. I'm hopeful that we will be better,
Right, yeah.
right? But when you look at that specific scenario, my question is, what would stop a hacker from doing the same thing we're trying to do to them,
Nothing.
to us?
Well, nothing, and the premise is that they will continue doing this, right? I mean,
Right.
Because that's what they do. I mean, as we speak, right? We know. I don't know if I can disclose. We know that they use AI, right? Especially in the context of ransomware. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with some of the attacks that are out there. Now we know that the bad guys sift through your files, right? And through AI decide which files they will let go of, which files they will charge more money, right? And they do that based on AI and machine learning, right? So they're doing this already. We need to be aware of that. We need to understand that that's what they're doing. And again, we need to focus on mitigation, because I think that is the solution to everything. I mean, try to detect these guys faster on our system and mitigate the consequence of an event.
One of the things when we look at some of the more recent data breaches and some of the most famous ones is there's always been a common denominator for some of those hackers. When you look at some of the biggest breaches, in your opinion, what are some of the common denominators you see between those different hacks? Have you looked into that at all?
So the hacks, there are two things that we need to sort of make sure that we understand. The common denominator between the hackers, and whether there's a hacker's profile that we can identify.
Right.
And the answer for that is no, unfortunately.
Okay.
There's really no, I can't really think of a hacker's profile at this point. Maybe earlier doing criminological research, you could have identified some.
You want to tell me
interesting characteristics.
You want to tell me the fat Italian guy in a New York Italian restaurant?
Right. Well, at the end of the day, I mean, I can't. There's some psychological research trying to sort of come up with a list of personality traits for hackers. But again, I mean, I'm not really sure we can come up with a profile, for a hacker and allow that will allow us to identify people as hackers ahead of time and sort of prevent them, right? So that's very difficult. In terms of hacking, definitely there are common denominators in many attacks. We know that hackers essentially learn from their peers how to behave before an attack, during an attack, and after an attack. So finding vulnerabilities, exploiting those vulnerabilities, what kind of tool to install, how to sort of make sure that you can use with the machine that you just infiltrated to, what to do with the machine, how to pivot to other machines. These are all things that we know that the hackers learn from their peers, from experience. And so when you look at different types of hacks, I assume, and again, I don't have knowledge, the only thing that I can talk about is the type of research that we do and that allows us to see, commonalities with respect to the way they behave on different computers that they capture, that there are, common behaviors on those computers. Again, in order for us to come up with generalizable conclusion, we need to make sure that we run our experiments in more organizations, more networks, more infrastructures. And then I'll be able to answer that specific question in a more precise way. But based on my understanding, based on what I see on the computers that the hackers attack and that I sort of have exposure to, there are commonalities in the attacks.
Is there a data breach?
Behavioral patterns.
In the behavioral patterns. Is there a breach that you look at and you go, this was a, classic example of the hackers kind of understanding someone's network, really penetrating it and exploiting data, that you go, wow, this is like a scary thought? Or are all breaches pretty much what I like to consider a crime of opportunity plus luck plus, the guy clicking on a link?
So it really depends. I mean, we know that, there are crime of opportunities, and we know that, many hackers also have, targets in mind that they try to victimize. I agree with you 100% that most of the hacked computers and networks, they're essentially opportunities that the bad guys were able to find vulnerabilities and exploit, get into and start messing around with. But having said that, if you think about actors like state actors, if you think about Stuxnet, if you think about Flame, if you think about all those operations, they had a specific target in mind. The designers of the attack, they had a specific target in mind.
They knew what they were going after.
They knew what they were doing, right? And we know that not only governments are doing that, organized crime groups are doing that as well. So it really depends.
Right. As I'm working on my book, one of the chapters in my book is how organized crime went from the streets to the computers. Mm-hmm. And it's really fascinating as I'm doing kind of my research on that to see how the Mafia has completely evolved from offline activities mm-hmm. to online activities. And whether it be, like you were saying earlier, casinos or, sports betting or gaming to, running e-commerce sites in different ways, but also, kind of going after businesses and becoming partners in websites because if you don't, we'll take you down.
Yeah. So the Mafia, again, we don't have a whole lot of research on the Mafia. We have a lot of research on gangs and
right.
how they use and how their operation.
Well, I think Mafia and gangs pretty much the same thing.
Well, I mean, Mafia. Mafia is an organized crime group, right?
Right.
With a hierarchy
and leadership.
They have the family traditions and they have code of behaviors. So it's in my view, is more organized than the gang, right? That's
the group in
essentially
Romania.
Essentially sell weed or crack right in the corner of the street and shoot each other, right? To simplify
those
things.
guys are pretty organized, so you'd be surprised.
Well, it is organized, right? It is organized, but not to the extent, right?
Of a family. They don't have the same code of honor.
Exactly. It's not only code of honor. It's the magnitude. I mean, the amount of money, right? The resources that the organized crime group has versus the gang, right? That is essentially very situated in a specific neighborhood or geographical region. It's in my view, it's similar but very much different. We see that the gangs are using online environment to sell their drugs. That's for sure. We see that gangs use online environment to brag about different activities. Sometimes even warn people from their activities, malicious activities. But in the offline environment, threat people, threat rival gangs. That we see a lot. I'm not familiar with a whole lot of research on how organized crime groups like the mob and how they are using the internet. We know that they do for human trafficking, for smuggling drugs, for communicating with each other. We know they're doing that. I don't have strong evidence
to really support.
To really show you. I mean, in the context of gangs, I can send you to a list of articles that will show you specific pictures from Twitter, from Facebook, from different social media platforms that will support everything I just talked about. But in the context of mobs and mobsters and mafia, the evidence there is more problematic.
Do you think there's a more sought out, do you think there's data that hackers seek more than others? Is there a piece of data people look for more than any other piece of data?
Again, you're going back to the question of intent, right? I mean, what is it? What are they? Why are they doing what they're doing?
No,
right?
I think I'm going more to the question of, if you look at data like an onion, right? We all know, name and email is one thing. Social security number is another. Credit card number is another. Medical records is a whole other one.
Right.
Do you feel like there's a data that people are looking for more than others?
I don't think so.
You think data is just data for most of them?
It's just data.
And it builds a piece?
And so it's really interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you hear about the Target breach or the Equifax breach. So millions of social security numbers, millions of credit card numbers, that are then pop up on the underground markets. Do you really know how many of those social security numbers and how many of those credit card numbers have been used by the bad guys?
No, I mean, there's no way. I mean, that's
that is an issue. Right? You can't. You
can't. I mean, this class action lawsuit against Equifax for their breach.
Right.
I mean, for the life of me, if they settle this out of court, they are the biggest idiots on the face of the earth. I mean, if anyone from Equifax is watching this, for Christ's sake, fight this. Right. Because you can win in court. Because there's no way for the other side to prove damages. Right. Anyone who's been compromised by Equifax was compromised previously by numerous other data breaches. I mean, I get an email every 2 weeks that says your data was found compromised in this breach. And you're like, okay, great. Now prove if some... I had my identity stolen. When I lived in Israel, when I left the States in 2009, I had my identity stolen a year later. And when I came back in 2014 and I went to rent an apartment, I'm like, okay, I don't have any recent credit history, but I had a perfect credit score before I left. And so I go to this place and I fill out an application. The guy goes, we're sorry, we can't rent you an apartment. And I go, what for? And he goes, you owe everyone money. You don't pay your bills. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I was like, I've been living outside the country for the last 5.5, 6 years. And the person goes, well, here's your credit report. And I went, I didn't live in New Mexico. Right. I wasn't in Arizona.
Right. But the question is, how people got your information?
Well, right? I know how.
How do you know that?
Because where my information was exposed from originally, where the first account was opened, was just outside of Chicago. And
when was that, by the way?
2010, 2011.
We're 2018. Data breaches happen every now and then. So your information is out there, if
my
not from Target, then from Equifax or from another company.
My information.
And so it's very difficult, to prove that your social security number or your credit card number, essentially the result got exposed as a result of an Equifax breach.
It's impossible to prove.
It's impossible, exactly.
It's impossible to prove.
Right. So for the bad guys, essentially, it's all data, right? I mean, it's really, it goes back to the question of intent and their motivation and why they're doing this, whether they're just trying to prove that their app, that they can do that, whether they are interested in getting money. I don't know how much money you can actually make from 50 million social security number and posting them online when you know that the feds are looking at you.
But I this is where I think the criminology piece comes in.
Yeah.
And this is where I feel like most CISOs, as good as their intentions are, and most organizations, as much as they want to defend and protect data, they go, well, so what if they got this data? And I feel like this is where the criminology piece, right. This is part of what you guys are looking at,
right.
Comes in very important, because sometimes data isn't about monetizing it. I can have a broker, right? It's we always watch these movies where people go and steal this very unique piece of art, but you don't go steal a piece of art to find a buyer. You found a buyer for the piece of art before you stole it,
right?
And you've already negotiated your price for it, so you know your margins,
right? Again, for us as criminologists, it's very difficult, right, to put some value on this. I mean, we know the value, right, of dumps, right? You just need to go on the dark net, right, and purchase social security number.
But that's not what I'm talking about. I feel like sometimes data isn't about for the hacker. I'm being hired by someone to go get data for what they want to use that data for.
Right.
And when we talk about the Marriott breach, one of the things I've always said, the Marriott breach was never about money. The Marriott breach was a nation state
Right.
going after data of 500 million people globally and travel patterns. And they weren't looking at 500 million people. They were probably looking at 10,000 out of those 500 million.
Right.
That could be government officials, people on, different intelligence agencies. Where are they traveling? Where are they staying? What dates? Who are they traveling with? What credit card did they use? How long did they stay for? Did they extend? Did they check out early? All, because that data gives you a map of strategy. If I only stay at Marriott, right? And you've hacked Marriott and you've got all the data, you know everywhere I've stayed, you know who stayed with me, right? I mean, that data is, for someone, that data has value.
So I think that the data you're talking about is more valuable to, the commercial industry, right? I mean, it's not really valuable for the hacker.
No, but corporate SPA.
So if you think about, if you think about Facebook, if you think about all the data that Facebook is collecting on us, if you think about all the data that Google and Amazon. Oh my gosh! I mean, it's just insane. They know everything about us, right?
I know.
I'm not really sure, whether hackers' access to that data, right?
Well, I don't think hackers want that data.
So that's what I'm saying. So I'm not really sure.
That's like, sorry, but that's like telling someone there's gold here. Go get me that gold.
Right.
I will pay you $50 million to get me $100 million worth of gold.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, and it's a smash and grab job.
Right.
That's what most hackers are. They're being hired by someone to go get data. For whatever reason, the other person could want that data. And it can be a third of a third of a third party that's doing it for someone else, but someone at the top's hiring someone and saying, go do this, go do this. And they're hiring someone else to go do this. And data, and everyone has a piece of data they're trying to get. And some of it could be for corporate reasons. I want to know where this CEO's traveling, what his plans are. Other of it could be, national defense and intelligence.
So again, I think that's a very good point. I mean, the last point is very good because at the end of the day, hackers is not one, cohesive group that you think about, right? And so it's really difficult for me to answer a question saying what kind of data these guys are after, what kind of data is most valuable for them. Because you have so many types of hackers out there. You have the script kiddies. For them, they just want to build reputation. I mean, I'm not really sure that they are into your data. They just want to, maybe they're
they're in to get data as well. They're in to get their stripes. They're soldiers in a crime organization.
Or not. Or, they could be just, someone who's trying to build reputation in order to understand, in order to conduct research, in order to do whatever, right? So, it's very difficult to answer this question and really put definite answer with respect to what kind of data they're after. Sometimes it's not about data. Sometimes it's about reputation. Sometimes it's just about proving that you can do that. Sometimes it's just about spreading your ideology, right? If you engage in hacktivism, right? So I'm not really sure I can answer what kind of data is most valuable by hacker. You can't answer it yourself if you go to the darknet, right? And buy Social Security numbers.
But no one can.
Yeah.
But I think the common question from a lot of CISOs is, what's the data people are going after?
Right.
And I think because you try to classify your data by most important, top, most valuable to least valuable, and your priorities kind of go based on your data classification because that's part of. Right, that's part of a security program. If you're architecting a security program, you're also classifying your data differently, right? And so part of the reason I asked you that question was because how do we classify data? And what you're saying is a very, very valid point. Hackers will go after anything.
Right.
You can't.
It depends, right? It depends.
Right, but when you think of like J.P. Morgan Chase, that breach, what did the hackers really take?
Right.
Name, email, phone number. That's it. That's data you and I can go on the dark web right now and find billions of that data. I mean, hell, we can call a data broker and get that kind of data.
Right. I mean, so again, I mean, you bring in the point of CISOs and trying to help them sort of be more wise with respect to the data that they need to protect. And again, I mean, I will go back to the risk assessment and risk management documents that NIST put together in effort to guide CISOs in those quests. It's really up to the organization, right? I mean, so if you're Equifax, you have one type of data that you want to spend most of your money protecting. If you're Bank of America, maybe a different type of data, right? It's really, it's really up to the organization, right?
Right.
So,
how do organizations get involved with the program that you're running at Georgia State? What are ways organizations can really support the program?
So we're all about research. We're all about trying to understand. We can work with organizations to help solve some of the issues, answer some of the questions that they have with respect to policies and tools and ways to nudge employees, to nudge people who are using the network to behave in a way that is more secure. At the same time, we can work with organizations to configure their environment to be more secure from the bad guys, but with a focus of mitigation. We put together events, workshops, so organization can help us there and get engaged with us through that route. We are building an educational program, security executive programs in evidence-based cybersecurity. So that's another way. CISOs.
Who's that program for? Like CFO, CISOs?
It's the C-suite, I think, okay. With the focus on CISOs, because again, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is guide CISO decision-making process. But we started focusing a lot of attention on risk assessment and risk management, and how our approach, the evidence-based cybersecurity approach, can guide risk assessment and risk management. So we think that the C-suite, the general counsel, are definitely, can definitely benefit from the program as well. These are the major ways companies, organizations can benefit from our services. Folks can go on our website and read about the research we publish. We have many professors conducting research in different areas of cybersecurity. We have many students working with us. So if organizations are interested in interns, that's another way. Folks can engage with us, hire our students for internships, opportunities, and so on. These are the major ways our organization can benefit from our services. Again, we're a nonprofit. We're a university. Under that caveat, folks can engage with us.
Very cool. Well, don't go anywhere. For those who are watching, we're going to stop now.
Okay.
But if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can go to Patreon, because we have a few more questions for David that are exclusively for our Patreon fans. If you go to patreon.com/CyberHub Engage, you'll be able to watch the rest of my interview with David there. So for those watching us on YouTube, listening to us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you like to listen to your podcast, thank you for listening. To get the rest of our interview, go to patreon.com, patreon.com/CyberHub Engage. Become a subscriber there, and you can finish the rest of our interview. And we're going to be talking about the future of criminal justice and cybersecurity. That's a topic that can be a whole episode, but it's only available on Patreon. David, is really the future of criminal justice and cybersecurity? I mean, eventually everything is going to become online, isn't it?
I mean, so it's as you mentioned, this is a